Erin Simon, Vice President and Head of Plastic Waste and Business for World Wildlife Fund, and Jessica Berk Ross, Managing Partner of Global Public Affairs for Finn Partners, talks to host Doug Simon on PR's Top Pros Talk.
Erin, thanks so much for sharing Simon Power on the video podcast. And I thought it made sense to start with a little quick top line about the World Wildlife Fund does and what your role is in it.
World Wildlife Fund is one of the world's largest conservation networks. We are located in over 100 countries and supported by more than 5 million members globally. Our mission is really to protect the world's most precious ecosystems. And we do that by working with local communities and with the best science to solve some of those major crises that are facing our world today.
And your role specifically is in plastics?
Yeah, so my role is to develop a strategy and figure out how we're going to end plastic pollution. Well, and I say we, like as if I'm speaking just about WWF, but how the collective can come together to address it. We have a theory of change around fixing this broken system. And so I help us to figure out how we can work with businesses and policymakers and individuals to do their part to end plastic pollution.
And Jessica, there's so many different partners, working teams, issues that are being covered. From a communications perspective, how do you approach handling that complexity?
It's very true. Because this is a global process and a national process as well, we really have to pay attention to a lot of different stakeholder groups. So messaging is extremely important. Coming up with new and creative tactics is really important. Using data is a critical piece of the communications challenge. It's extraordinarily complex issue, but when you boil it down to sort of a simple outcome, we all really want to have a cleaner, healthier world. So I think trying to ensure that all of the complexity is communicated in a way that resonates with these stakeholders and doesn't instantly alienate half your audience or 37% of your audience or the 13% of your audience that will never agree with you. So you have to really think about those things ahead of time. So there's a lot of managing of messaging and thinking through multiple modalities.
Yeah, and Jessica, you mentioned the data piece of it and also that important issue that there's so many different constituencies and people have different views or different understandings might be a better piece. Is a key part of the communications process to be educating different groups and the public, and what are some ways you go about that?
I think that there's a communications continuum, and it starts with awareness, and then it moves to education, and then it moves to action. So, plastics is an interesting issue, and it affects everybody, but it hasn't for a long time been sort of the top issue that people are thinking about. People think about climate, they think about other things, but once people are aware of the plastics issue, they actually care a lot about it. So making sure they're aware and then moving to that sort of education phase. And then you can think about what kind of stakeholder actions do I need? Do I need people to communicate with their legislators? Do I want them to take some sort of action? Do I want them to press the button or write or what is that call to action? So it really is that continuum.
Yeah, and Erin, I know from speaking with you that plastics isn't just one issue, it's complex. Can you maybe share a little bit about that and some of the ways you might be navigating it?
Just kind of building off of what Jessica was talking about, we use the same stepwise approach in getting all of our stakeholders to act, right? We help them to understand the urgency and the impact of the issue. You can see the images of the turtles with the straw in the nose. You can see these massively trashed beaches, and you can hear messages around a dump truck a minute of plastic entering our oceans, and the fact that we have over 2,000 species coming in contact with it. And you can feel as an individual, as a government, or as a business, a real urgency to act, but not a clear direction of how you solve for that, right? it can be individual actions. And I mean that by all of those different actors, as far as just stopping the use, right? And a lot of people go to that first. Well, what if we just get rid of plastics? Well, plastics do play a role in our lives, and not just in our daily single-use intake of plastics, right? Like, we use them to deliver food. We also use them in hospitals. We all really became well acquainted with that in COVID. They make our cars lighter, our airplanes lighter. So there's all these different uses. And so we want to thoughtfully address what we don't need. If we do need that thing, we want to make it out of something else. We also have to think about where that thing is coming from, right? Like, if I want to make the packaging out of paper, it comes from trees, and I still need to recycle it. And if it comes from glass, that comes from sand, right? Aluminum comes from bauxite that you have to mine. All of these things come from the planet at a cost, and then you have to get them back. And so the issue of this whole systems change and the need for partnership in each of those individual actions between companies and governments and individuals is what makes it so complicated. That I can't just send you off to do something and a government to go off and do something and just to go, pick up some trash. I need you all to do it in a coordinated way. So we ultimately take that linear system that we are living in, which is taking something from the planet, using it for a few moments, and then throwing it away, and sort of looping all of those consecutive pieces together in one circle. And so that's the complexity, because we're not really great at thinking in a systems perspective. We like to sort of have more bite-sized pieces.
Yeah. So many organizations, a key part is making sure their members can actually feel that they're part of the solution. But when it is so complex, what are the ways you want to do that? And I'll let either of you jump in, or in both of you, actually, I'd like to hear on that issue.
I need to educate, empower, and excite individuals, right? For too long, especially with this issue, they've been told that if they just recycle, or if they just follow those chasing arrows, that they will have done enough, right? They've also been told that plastic is the answer to everything, right? Plastic is the future, I think the graduate said. So there was, that's a lot of confusion for them. And they're sort of and then they have all these headlines that say recycling is broken, we can't recycle our way out of this. And so I think all of that is very dismissive of efforts that they are making. And so I often start with the simple things, right? Like, pick up, the trash you see where it shouldn't be. If you want to build on that, rethink your relationship with plastic. Take that one thing in your house that is a single-use plastic and try to replace it with something else. What you find is that individuals get really excited when they understand the benefit of all those individual actions and how they build up. When they understand by not using a straw, a single-use straw, that they can be a part of protecting a turtle, right? It's a very physical, it's very tangible to them. And so from there, you can build them up to bigger actions. And whether that is writing in letters, advocating on the Hill, signing petitions, but that is kind of how you mobilize them through that and make them feel like they are a part of the solution and not being forced into a system that's quite broken still.
Yeah. And Jessica, I know you've been sort of paying attention, taking notes, and Erin was challenging you to answer the second part of that. So why don't you just jump in?
I come from a political background, and so I always think about, how can we build consensus? Where are there things that we can agree, with each other? Because the tricky part with anything important and large like this, this is existential work that really matters. So how do we find the places where there are agreement? And then how do we push those levers? I always think of it as, how do we create the biggest tent we possibly can create? And so if we can do that, and as Erin said, some of that is about telling those stories of impact, or the stories of personal empowerment. What can I do as an individual? What can happen, and how do we tell sort of the impact of what could happen? So that's sort of how I always think about it, is how can we find a place that we can agree, converge, and then from there build communications elements that drive that forward.
Why don't I leave a moment for each of you to provide a final thought? I'll let Jessica, you can go first and let Erin finish up.
I think this is just extraordinary work, incredibly important. I've been privileged to be a part of it with Erin and her team. They're so hardworking, fast thinking, and there's a real global urgency to this. So I just think it's critical, and I'm just delighted to have the opportunity to work on something that's so vital to our world.
I think it's easy to get overwhelmed by complexity, almost paralyzed. But if you don't act, absolutely nothing will happen. That is a given, right? So I think my takeaway from this is always like, try the next right thing. Don't go for perfect, and try to be a part of the change, because the fact that there is so much interest in this issue makes me hopeful. And the fact that the right people are engaged on it, from governments to businesses to individuals to community members, is the reason that we are making progress. And it's slow progress, to be clear. It's way too slow for the planet, but it's happening. And that's why I'm really hopeful.
Yeah, well, while you say don't go for perfect, you two have really been perfect guests. So thanks so much for being part of this.
Thanks for having us.